understand from U.S. Haines data and other kind of diet data and from all sugar availability data in the country. So you kind of see the scaling. But what you can't see unless you look at individual countries is the rapid change country by country, and I can't really show it there. This is scaling the countries across the globe, and you see at this point in time, Chile was #1 in the world. They had a little tiny 5% tax. We got a small 3% decline in purchases from that tax, but Chile's really up there. Mexico went down after the tax, but not a big tax and not a huge decline, a decline commensurate with the tax. And those are the countries in a general scale. However, if you looked at a country way at the bottom like India, it would belie the fact that 5 or 10% of the Indians that buy daily sugary beverages, and would belie the fact that you'll see every week in every village at least one infant every day consuming sugary beverages. So that it's a large country, and there's a lot of non-consumers day to day. And so the per capitas may not show the whole picture. So this is the per capita, again, using an infant at the same weight as an adult, and you see the kind of trends in some of the key countries in the world, and you see some of the countries that are going up. China, if you look at more detail at consumption data like we have for China, you see actually quite a huge explosion in consumption, but it's going from nothing. Essentially, when I went to China in 1989, they consumed 2 grams of sugar per capita per day. Today, China has a pork reserve and a sugar reserve. If Frank or other people that visit China often can tell you, you'll find a pastry shop on every street. You'll have at the end of banquets no longer just fruit, but sweets, and they never ate sugar when I went there. These are things that have been introduced and promoted and pushed by the West and by Chinese firms until it's become part of their diet today. But it was certainly not a part of the diet decades ago. And I don't need to go through the trends. I want to talk about diet beverages for a second, because we're coming to that also at the end of this in a key symposia. Diet beverages are something we're going to see more and more of. We are also going to see more water consumed. In Mexico, they didn't have a history of diet beverage consumption. As soon as the tax went in, people bought more water, and instead of anything else, that was their key substitute. It depends on the country, and it depends on the pattern. In the US, with the big campaign and the discussions of sugary beverages around 2002, 3, 4, we saw a big shift in upper-educated America to diet beverages. But then within 5 to 6 years, the blogosphere scared everyone, and we moved to water and consumed a lot more water among upper-educated Americans, and diet beverage went down. You see that in the picture there for North America. And in England, you're seeing much of the substitution initially into diet beverages, and they consume them, and they don't have the kind of blogosphere that we have, and that is what they're consuming much more of now. And when I show you later and talk about some countries with some different approaches, we're seeing in some countries diet beverages replacing sugary beverages after taxes or warning labels or other kind of programs go into effect. And in other countries, we're seeing water. And we have yet to see a country that's moved to juice. We're seeing in some moving more to alcohol. So we don't truly understand yet the substitutes for beverages globally. It'll be very different country to country, and it will change over time, of course. So we have a set of policies that we talk about as our policy arsenal, that when Kelly talked about the policy side. We have the fiscal policies. We used to think those were the foolproof. Those really would work the best. Of course, those are the hardest to get, the taxes and so forth, as we all know. But we have another one, labeling, that I'll just tell you verbally a few of the results that I can't show you for Chile, but will shock you that the impact of these negative warning labels in Chile have been 4 times as impactful or 5 times as impactful as the taxes in Mexico. And marketing controls and public institutions. Those are really all we have done today. We haven't dealt with the food service sector at all. We haven't started working on pricing and controls in many ways in that sector. We've done very little on the food system when it comes to obesity policy in a very big sense. So we're really in very, very early stages of policy change to try to deal with sugar and with the other unhealthy components of our diet and to move toward a healthy diet in any sense at all. And of course, Mexico, Walter and I, Walter Willett, who just came in the room, and I were involved in working with that government when they started. One of the things the academics in Mexico decided, the first thing was to get all the academic societies on their side. So when they had a tax battle, they wouldn't have all these industry critics that were bought off by academics drowning out what they said. They would have endorsements from the major medical and other societies. And they did that in Mexico. They did a beverage panel. They then had the diabetologists, the diabetes world, the endocrinology world, the heart world, the cancer. All of them published this beverage panel paper which promoted water, promoted coffee, tea, then diet beverages, talked about all the dangers of sugar and sugary beverages, and pushed for a sugar beverage tax and many other ways to get sugar and beverages out of the diets of Mexicans. And that was published by every medical journal in the country, and that was very, very important as one of the first steps. Then they had a several-year policy push. It led to large declines in consumption, particularly by higher educated Mexicans. And then Michael Bloomberg came in. They got the tax. It was a small tax. The tax has been impactful. It's worked equivalent to the size of the tax, but it is not a big tax. It is not going to end obesity in Mexico. It's going to save tens of thousands of lives. It's going to cut thousands of diabetic cases. We have Steve Goldmacher working on one study with our Mexican colleagues. We have a number of other studies that have come out to show the number of obese individuals who will no longer become obese, the obesity prevention, the diabetes prevention, the mortality prevention. But that's a shift in the distribution, not cutting obesity in the short term, not a major change in diabetes and in the short term. We need much bigger changes. But the general thing was in Mexico, we were facing a decline in purchases. It went on because of that negative campaign that happened over a several-year period. So we had a decline, so we looked at the effect of the tax on enhancing the decline, and that was what we call the tax effect. Not the decline itself, that would be taking credit for a decline that was already occurring, but the extra effect of the decline that happened after the tax. And that's what we talk about in that blue area, and we found the decline. The top is a decline in sugary beverage purchases. The bottom is water purchases, which went up significantly in that country. And then the top one there is the lower income group, which decreased significantly more its purchases of sugary beverages, which is what we want. It may be what economists call regressive, but from a health perspective, the population with the undiagnosed, poorly treated or untreated diabetes is the poor in Mexico. And so that population we do want to have benefited the most, and it's a progressive tax from a health perspective. And that's the way we need to think of it, and we are trying to get the world to understand that. We also had a junk food tax in Mexico. They taxed, it was a gift from the Minister of Finance, actually. He needed extra money, and what a better thing to tax than unhealthy foods. He created a very simplistic definition. He called it, we had like 2 minutes to give him an answer, 10 minutes actually. So it wasn't a sophisticated measure of junk food, but we got a reduction in it, just as we would expect, commensurate with the tax. But where do we stand on taxes now? Aside from the junk food taxes in Mexico and Hungary, we don't have food taxes yet, but we have several countries considering really comprehensive taxes across foods and beverages that are unhealthy. We have sugary beverage taxes moving across the globe, and I'll show you in a map in a second. We have really consideration of other kinds of ways to use fiscal policy, but we're in a very early stage in this whole world. But this is a sense, we've moved to 38 countries with sugary beverage taxes. In the Americas, This gives you just some idea where we are on these taxes. Some of them, like Peru, it's really an 8% tax added. You can see across Europe the number with taxes. The UK is one kind of tax, a tiered system. I'll come back and talk about. Essentially, up until the time of the UK and now South Africa, we had taxes only on volume. We're beginning to have taxes that are, let's say, tiers of the amounts of sugar, or in the case of South Africa, the grams of sugar, to try to learn what kind of tax will really have the biggest impact. The UK tax, even before it was passed, led to a lot of reformulation. Hasn't actually been measured in numbers, but people are speculating in lovely commentaries that it's had a huge effect. We have really across the globe. And this is really in 5 years. If you think about from the time Massachusetts taxed tobacco, how many years it took to get 6 states in the US to tax tobacco. What we have done in the world in sugary beverages is just astounding when you compare it with tobacco. Some of that's the media cycle and how quickly things get out there, and some of it is just the global drastic need to deal with NCDs and the poor diets of the world and the high sugary beverage intake and the high sugar consumption. But this is kind of where we are in the world. So where do we go? That's the fiscal policy. One of the more interesting countries that I'm going to spend some time talking about is Chile. The reason I'm going to talk about Chile is they were the first country that didn't put in some kind of positive, but put in a negative warning label, very carefully decided upon, that they then linked to marketing in schools in ways that are very interesting. So I'll talk more in detail about that. And they actually taxed the retailer. If the retailer didn't have those labels on the product, the retailers were given big fines. And it worked in that area. We haven't done things on food service or street vendors, as I've mentioned, except in Chile and Singapore with a little tiny project where they moved all the street vendors into centers and tried to get them to use healthy fats. So we have a lot of things to work on in the future that we need research and we need actual projects in countries on. In marketing, which is the area we talk a lot about, we talk about, as Kelly did, all the problems we have with here. You may or may not know that in the 60s, the FTC had hearings, and we came very close in our country to banning children's TV marketing. It wasn't that. We were quite close. If you ever went back and looked at those FTC hearings headed by a nutritionist, Kate Clancy, it's quite, there was a vote that was very, very close to banning children's TV marketing. At any rate, in Chile, they did that. They did have a very comprehensive law that banned TV marketing. They also banned in the schools the same kind of products that had the negative logos on them. But Chile isn't the most interesting school program. Brazil is, and I'm going to show you that. Brazil has a school law which hasn't been evaluated yet. Actually, right now, we're doing some secondary work to see if it's worth evaluating, if it's truly been implemented enough that we can, and it hasn't been implemented in the whole country, so we have still an experimental kind of options to look at. It's only been in around a third of the state. But in that, the schools are required to buy locally, 30% of the food from local farmers. 40% additional food must come from real food. So 70% of the food that's in the schools must come from real food. And that law happened 12 years ago or so, and it's now just being implemented. So implementation is half the game. It's not just having a law. And it's very important, and it's important for us to also show the employment effects of that law, because that law, several countries in Africa have copied without really ever seeing results, because it's a good employment generation kind of approach, using school food money to help local farmers. So that's really the most innovative school feeding, but we have in low and middle income countries literally no rigorous evaluations of the school food programs. So we move to the next area, which has become a huge area. Front of the package profiling talks about putting a simple logo on the front of a package, like the Smart Choices that was going to be done in the US. And there are many positive logo programs around the world. There's some mixed logos with if you have a high in saturated fat, sugar, salt, you get a red light. You might get a green light if you're low in one, and the traffic lights you may have multiple ones. Or like the Chilean system, where if it's bad, you get